So here is my maple board that I'm going to turn into a banjo. You can see it has some imperfections, but that's okay. That's going to be waste anyway. And I just will cut out the parts I need. I'm going to run the board through the planer so that it's a uniform thickness. Here you see I've drawn the patterns on the wood in several places. Notice that the long pieces are with the grain. You wouldn't want one like this where most of the end grain would be showing on the banjo. So here's the piece cut out, rough cut with the bandsaw, and I leave the pencil mark, and I will now sand it to the pencil mark with the belt sander. This arm to my router, put just a square bit in there. This is adjustable, has a hole here which I'm going to put right over the dowel and hopefully route out a perfect groove. So you see I have a perfect groove there now, and I can adjust this in or out to make the groove wider and exactly the right size.
Yep.
Okay, go. Okay, once I have the right width of my groove cut out, I cut this board exactly in half, exactly parallel to this side, so that I have a perfect half circle like this, which I then put in my saw so that when I cut it, I put the piece in here so that when it goes here, it cuts exactly square. Okay. Okay, so when I put my piece in, I can adjust it, line it up exactly on this mark right here, This is a scrap piece that's already been cut, but I'm going to just show you. Okay, put it in there. That way when the end is cut exactly square. Then I turn it over, put that on that mark, and do it again. And I have a quarter circle with the ends exactly square. Here is the first row of maple. It's mounted on plywood base, and this is all plywood here. The maple starts right here, and you can see that it's rough. It needs to be sanded. This will all be cut off right there at the end. This is the same base I've used for the other banjos. This is my jig I made up for sanding. I just put a dowel here and cut a hole for the sanding drum. This slides on here. Then I can just rotate it around as the drum turns to sand it, and then move it closer and closer as I sand more and more off. So here it is, sanded down a little bit. Still got a little ways to go. I'll leave that last part for when I have them all on there, all the layers on there, and I do it with finer grit sandpaper so it gets smoother. So it's ready for the next layer now. So here's the next layer clamped on, ready to sit overnight and be ready to sand tomorrow. Here I have the 3 layers of maple. You can see the last layer is sticking out a little bit. That's what will get sanded down to match these others. And I'm ready to put the last layer of walnut on now. The rim is now sanded down smooth and to the proper diameter. I'm ready to sand the inside now, but in order to do that, I have to cut it off of the base. So this is how I'm going to do that. I've attached it to a board which attaches to my fence. The drum can rotate. I'm going to start the saw and then raise the blade slowly until it comes through there. And once it's through, I'll rotate this around and hopefully make a nice smooth cut at the right distance. So there it is. I'll just sand that little part off right there. Looks like a nice smooth cut. I'm happy with that. Ready to go. This is my jig that I'm using to sand the inside. This is different than I've done before. Hope it works. I routed out a groove that just fits the rim. I had to add a little masking tape on the outside because it was a little bit sloppy, but now it's a perfect fit. And the hole will fit over the sanding drum, and hopefully it's going to work. Well, it's all done, all sanded. Happy the way it turned out. Looks pretty good. I'm going to cut the maple board into 3 strips, glue them together for the neck. I have my 3 strips now. I will just put them together like this, glue them together, and then start carving them down to make the neck. So it's all glued together, ready to sit overnight and dry. Here is my neck blank, all glued together. Doesn't look very pretty. It's hard to get this edge exactly even with each other, so I make it a little wider than I really need, and then I trim it off by running it through my table saw and getting a nice flat surface. So now this surface is nice and flat and even. This is the surface I glue the fingerboard on. It's the only one that really matters right now because all the other surfaces are going to be cut off when I shape the neck. The first thing I'm going to do with my neck piece is cut the angle here where it's going to fit onto the rim. I'm going to do that first because it's kind of tricky, and it's also very important that I get exactly right. What I have to do, the reason it's tricky, I have to match this curve, so I'm going to mark that. Curve, and I have to also angle it because the neck angles down slightly when it attaches to the rim. I went ahead and cut out a little bit with the bandsaw just so I don't have quite so much to take off with my sander. And the other reason I'm doing this part first is because I've made, again, my blank extra long, more than I need, so I can just keep working at this until I get it a really nice fit. And if I use up a little bit, that's okay. And then once I get it right, I'll make all my measurements from this end. This is my jig I'm going to use to form the heel of the neck where it meets the rim. This is the same jig I've used my other 2 banjos. It worked pretty well, so I'm using it again. What I've done is mounted, clamped, and wired the neck blank to the board. The board is movable, and it rests on another board that raises this end to match the elevation or the angle that the neck has to come off of the rim at. And this pivot that it pivots on is the same radius as the radius of the banjo rim. So now it's just a matter of sanding it down until it matches the rim. I got a nice fit, real tight fit, and the right angle. It slopes down at just about the right angle. So I'm happy with my neck so far. This is the rim, and you can see it has a sharp edge, which we don't want on the bottom of our banjo. So I'm going to round that off so it's nice and round with this round over router bit. now you can see it's a nice rounded edge on both sides. I have to sand it still to make it nice and smooth, but now it's a much nicer bottom for the banjo. Notice with this router bit, the roundover bit, it regulates itself as to how much it takes off. It just cuts until the wood comes up against this bearing, and it takes that much off every time. So that's a real easy bit to use and not have to worry about taking too much off. I just got my hardware from UPS, so I'm ready to cut a notch for the tone ring. I always get a little nervous about this because if I make a mistake here, I start all over again. I have to cut down enough so that this is going to stick up about 1/4 of an inch above the rim, and I also have to cut into the rim so that the tone ring will just slip over that. If I cut too much, then it will be sloppy. You want the tone ring to be in contact with the wood all the way around. So I've got to cut my notch exactly right so the tone ring just slips over that notch. I'm using a straight bit. This time the how much I take off is governed by the fence, so I can move the fence in and out to make more or less cut. I've got it set where I think it's just not quite enough, and then I'll just move it gradually until I have exactly the right fit. The height, of course, is determined by how high this sticks up. That's not so critical, and I've got that where I want it. It's just that getting that fit just right on the rim. So you see my first cut, as I thought, is not quite big enough. I got to cut more, so I'll just keep moving my fence back gradually until taking off a little bit more each time until it just slips over there. Here's the final notch and a real nice tight fit. Very happy with it. I can sleep well tonight. I'm going to cut the peg head. I've marked it there where it's supposed to be. I've attached a piece of scrap to hold it at the right angle. I'm going to take off just a little bit to start with and see if it's parallel to the line I want. This angle is not critical. As long as you're close, it's okay. That looks pretty good, so I'll just move my fence back and take off up to the line. Worked pretty well, got a nice smooth cut, right angle, so I'm ready to go to the next step. This is the adjustable truss rod I'm going to install in the top of the neck. This is used to adjust the neck if it ever gets out of alignment later on. So I have to route a channel down the middle of my top of my neck for this to sit into. I've cut a piece of scrap that I will run through first each time to make sure that I'm not making a mistake on my real neck. And I'll just keep moving the fence gradually until I get exactly the right fit. I've made my first cut. It's not nearly deep enough or wide enough on purpose, because this is another cut that has to be exact. These blocks have to fit exactly snug in the groove, and they have to be exactly flush with the top. Otherwise, they will rattle around in the neck of the banjo, and you don't want that. So I will just gradually make this groove bigger and deeper until I get exactly the right fit. So there it is. Got a nice fit, and the fretboard will fit right on top of that, and the nut will go right there, and there'll be an access here to adjust that if it's ever needed. I've glued on the fretboard. Also added some extra strips here. Luthiers call those ears. It just makes the peg head a little wider, so it'll be wide enough for to cut out. This is the pattern I'm going to use. This is the overlay that will go there. I'll cut out a pattern like that. I'm going to do an inlay of a star out of this mother of pearl, and it'll go right in there. And then the truss rod cover will go right in there. I'm going to do the inlay next before I glue it on, because it's kind of tricky, and if I make a mistake I can just order a new piece and not have it all glued on. I've glued my star to the mother of pearl and I'm ready to cut it. I'm going to use this Dremel. That's actually a Harbor Freight's version of the Dremel tool, and to cut it out, and hopefully it works. So it turned out pretty good. It's a little rough in some places, but I'll file that down or sand it down smooth. But turned out pretty good. I sanded the star smooth and taped it in place on the peghead overlay. Now I have to cut a recess for the star to fit into, and so I will just start by cutting an outline with my knife. This is a Forstner drill bit. It drills a flat bottom hole, and I've put my smallest one in the drill press. I've tested it. The drill press has a stop. It'll only go so deep. You adjust that stop, and so I've used a piece of a board that's going to be cut off and a piece of scrap from when I cut out the star to get exactly the right depth. I want this to be exactly flush. If it's not, it's not critical. If it's up too high at the end, I can sand a little bit of it off. If it's down too low, I can sand the wood around it a little bit. But neither one of those is what I want to do. I'd like to have it end up exactly flush. So that's my goal. So what I'm going to do is just drill out all the parts that I can, of the star, not getting too close to the edges, of course, and then I'll cut the rest away with a knife. So there it is, all carved out, ready to put the star in and glue it in. And there it is. It's not glued yet, but it's ready. Got a nice fit. Ready to be glued. Here's a star all glued in. I've got to do a little sanding on the wood that has some glue marks on it, but happy with the fit. I have my neck all taped off as to what stays and what goes and marked with pencil. I'm ready to start carving it up to get the right shape for the neck. This is a little scary. I'm going to start with the peg head because the peg head is cut so that the cuts are perpendicular to the top of the fretboard, not perpendicular to this. And so it helps to have the bottom still here so that my saw is perpendicular to the fretboard and not to this surface. That's about as close as I want to get with the bandsaw. I'll take the rest of that out with the sander. So it's starting to look pretty good. I'll have to sand the rest of that by hand to get into all the little crevices. But it's looking pretty good, looking like a banjo. I'm ready to take off the rest of this material now and leave just the neck. So I've trimmed it pretty close with the bandsaw, and the rest will just be cut off anyway, so I'll shape the rest with the sander. Now I'm ready to cut the sides down a little bit to match this tape that I have on there. So now I have my basic shape of the neck, and now it's just a matter of sanding down until I get the right shape. I have this template I printed from the internet, and I'll just sand until the neck will fit in these holes at each one of those fret locations. First fret, fourth fret, so forth. And when I do, I'll have a nice looking neck. So here's the neck. It's pretty much finished. Still have a little bit of sanding to do, but it's pretty much done and looks okay. These are the bindings that go on each side of the fretboard to cover up the slots in here. I've used my router to put a notch on each side, and I've steamed one and put a bend in it to match the bend in the neck. And so I'm ready to glue those on. They'll stick up a little bit when I glue them on, then I'll sand that down smooth with the top of the fretboard. I have glued on the bindings, got a nice fit, they've been sanded down. Now I'm going to cut a notch in my neck right here to allow room for the tension hoop when this beats up against the rim. Since the neck is curved here, I can't use a regular straight fence to do this, so I've created my own fence out of a piece of 2x4 and just curved it so that when the neck comes in contact with the bit there, I can just curve it around and create that notch. And once again, I'll start with it. I'll try on some scrap first, and I'll just gradually take off more and more until I get it just right. There's the notch. Came out pretty good. I've glued on a walnut cap onto my heel. Now I'm going to sand that down smooth to match the others. I have sanded the cap now. I'm going to use my scraper to do some final shaping on the neck to thin this out a little bit right through here. I'm ready to put the dots in now. This is the pearl, the size of the dots. It's not very big. I have a Forstner bit. That's exactly the same diameter. The tricky part is getting just that depth and no more. I made a holder for my neck to keep it level. So once I get the right depth, I don't have to keep adjusting it as the neck changes angle, so it'll always be the same angle. So I'll just start small and just keep increasing slightly until I get the right depth. So there's what the holes look like. And I've got them about the right depth. I've tried one already and it's the right depth, so I'm ready to just drill the rest of them. So there are the dots. They're all in. Worked out okay. I'm ready to start cutting holes in my rim. I always get a little nervous when I cut into something I worked so hard for, but hopefully it goes okay. I've made this jig to support the rim, and all I got to do now is line it up and drill a hole through it. I'm going to start by drilling a large hole for the dowel to pass through, and then everything else will be measured from that hole. This is the size dowel I'll be using, and so it passes through there easily. I've cut the hole just a little bit larger than the actual dowel because it doesn't need to be tight. So now I'll mark all my holes for my brackets from that hole there. I've got all my holes marked for the brackets, so now I'm ready to drill the holes for the brackets. So there they are, the holes all drilled for the brackets. I'm ready to drill the hole for my dowel that goes into the neck. I've taken a lot of time to line it up exactly straight because the dowel needs to be perfectly in line with the center line of the neck going down. The dowel's all glued in now. It fits through that hole like so. So it looks good. I'm ready to start putting the frets in now. This is the fret wire. This is the actual fret here, and this is the tang that goes into the slots here. I'm using my rotary tool that I have mounted in this holder I've made. I cut it off with this. This is just an abrasive wheel. And I cut it off a little longer than I need, and then I cut off the tangs on each end. I put the tangs in the slots, put a little glue on it first, put them in the slots. I do about 5 or 6 at a time. When I get those all done, then I hammer them in with this board so that they're all level, and my rubber mallet. These are the ones where the tape's already been removed, the ones I've already done. Again, these you notice that they're longer than I need, and I'll cut those off with the nippers here, like so, and then file them down like I've done these. These have already been filed down, even with the board. The frets are all in, all sanded down, starting to look like a banjo. This is a piece of bone from a cow, which I'm going to cut to make the nut that fits right in there. I've clamped the nut so that I can keep it steady. This is another cut that has to be exact. I've marked it where the strings will go. They have to be exactly evenly spaced, so the strings are evenly spaced, and they must be all the same depth so the strings are all level with each other. And I'm going to use my rotary tool to make those cuts. The nut is close to the final shape. I've cut the notches there for the strings. I will wait until I put the strings on to make the final adjustments and the final cuts to make sure everything is just right, and then I'll glue it in. I've drilled one more hole in my rim for the tailpiece hardware and screwed the screw into the end of the dowel. That goes like this. And the screw goes through that hole. And then this nut screws on. The tail piece goes through that. And that holds the strings. That's where the strings are tied on. The neck is never permanently attached to the rim. It's just held on by that screw at the end when it's tight. And also this hardware is made especially for this. This little rod goes through the dowel, and then this slips over that. And when that screw is tightened against this part, it snugs that up against the rim. It's getting close. It's starting to look like a banjo. The only thing I have left to do now is drill the holes and put the pegs in, the tuning pegs and the fifth peg, and then to put the finish on. I'm actually going to put the finish on next, and what I've done is I've sanded everything down 2 or 3 times with increasingly fine grit sandpaper. It's all really smooth now, ready to get the finish. I'm going to start the finishing with just putting some Boyle linseed oil on. I just put a bunch on and let it soak in, and then wipe it off. So here's what it looks like with the Boyle linseed oil on. I'm ready to start putting the polyurethane on now. I'm using a wipe-on polyurethane that's very easy to use. I really like it. As the name implies, you just apply it with a soft cloth. Just wipe it on. It goes on very thin. That's why you can wipe it on. But because it's very thin, you don't get brush marks or things like that. It just wipes on. I've taped off the fretboard because it gets a different finish. It doesn't get the polyurethane. So we just wipe that on. It can be recoated in about 3 hours. I sand it with 400 grit sandpaper in between each coat. I have finished the finish now. Turned out really nice. I'm happy with it. Ended up putting about 10 coats of polyurethane on. The neck, the fretboard, the rosewood, I've treated with a gunstock oil. It doesn't get any polyurethane, and that can be retreated just like a gunstock is oiled every now and then. This can also be oiled every now and then. So I'm ready to put on drill the holes for the pegs now. I taped the pattern back on to the peg head so I know where to drill the holes. I used a nail to put a pilot hole, to start a pilot hole for each one, so I'm ready to drill. So there are the holes. Well, I have encountered a problem. As you can see, the wood curves too much before it gets past this peg. so it doesn't sit flat against the wood. So I'm going to have to sand this down so it's flatter before it starts to curve, and then I'll have to refinish all this part of the below the peg head. I got it sanded down and it's good fit now. Now I just have to refinish all this part that I had to sand off. I'm ready to start putting things together now. I've put most of the brackets on. I haven't tightened them yet, but they're just a screw that goes through the rim, and then the bracket screws onto that, like so. The tone ring fits over that notch. The head has a groove on it that fits over the tone ring, like so. The tension hoop then fits over that onto that lip. These hooks then go in the notches on the tension hoop, and a nut on the end tightens, and when those nuts are tightened, it pulls the tension hoop down, making it tight like a drum. So here it is with all the hardware on. The rim plus all the hardware is called a pot. So the pot is all finished. The hole for the 5th string peg is a challenge. The peg is not glued in, it's just pressed in. It's tapered, and it also has these splines, and it has one big spline, extra big spline. So you have to drill a hole, then you have to ream it out so that the hole is tapered, and then I had to, with a little file, make a notch for that extra big spline so that it goes in only one way. So that's the way it's going to go, and I've got it where it's almost ready, and I'm going to tap it in the rest of the way. I don't want to tap on the knob, so I took the knob off, and I'm going to use the socket that fits over that, so I'll be hitting directly on the body rather than the knob. And I think it's good. It's in solid. The other tuning pegs are very easy. They just slip through the hole and then screw onto each other. There's some tolerance for not having the hole exactly right, but I got a pretty tight fit there, so those are very easy. And then I'll be ready to string it up. Well, here it is, all finished. Ready for somebody to come play it.